Hey Fearless Gamers, it's the wildcard from Fearless Games here. And it's time for the wildcard primer again. And this one is going to be on Space Marines. The generic Space Marine Codex, sometimes called the Vanilla Marines, even though I think it's a bit of a misnomer. I'm going over them because they're the base work, they're the ground floor, if you will, for all the other Space Marine Codices out there, including Dark Angel, which I already did. So when I say something's got the strength and the weaknesses of being and the strength is being a Space Marine and the weakness is being a Space Marine, you know what I'm talking about because of this primer. So let's get right to it. Strengths and weaknesses. Space Marines have 3 strengths ultimately: tactical flexibility, staying power, and being a forgiving army. Tactical flexibility comes from their stat line and their war gear. Good innate shooting potential and close combat potential, and then the war gear. Their staying power comes from their stat line with good toughness, and their armor save, which is some of the best in the business, and their special rule, and they show no fear. Those things combined gives them good staying power. And those 2 things, tactical flexibility and staying power, equate to forgiving, or I should say equal to being forgiving. And by that I mean, if you make a mistake with Space Marines, you can you can bounce back from it. Your opponent's going to have a more difficult time capitalizing your mistake, and even if they try to, you can come back, bounce back, and still win the game, where with other armies, they're pretty delicate, and you can end up just flat out losing if you make one mistake. So, those are the strengths. Now when it comes down to weaknesses, Space Marine weaknesses, first up, their not the squad size, but the army size. The army size is going to be on the smaller side of things in 40k. In the grand spectrum of 40k army sizes, Space Marines are on the smaller side. And I believe some of the smallest forces you can build are from some form of Space Marine Codex. So, with that being said, you're always going to be, not always, but anytime you're not facing another Space Marine force, you're pretty much going to be outnumbered. It's going to be a bit of an uphill battle if you're going in a war of attrition. Space Marines can still do it. That's not what they're meant for, but it is something to consider. You know, if you're going to go on killing more of your opponent than the opponent kills of your force, and if they're triple your size, that can be a bit of a difficulty. So, going along with this army size being on the smaller side, you have another weakness of them being Space Marines, and by that, I will define it by everybody has an answer for Space Marines. Everybody has an idea, a mindset for playing against Space Marines because they've done it. Not everybody plays against Dark Eldar, for example. So, not everybody has an answer for Dark Eldar. They may have Theory Hammer and metagaming, but it's not a true answer until you play against them. But everybody's played against Space Marines, and if you haven't yet, you definitely will. Especially if you're brand new to 40k, don't worry, you're going to be playing against Space Marines pretty soon. Especially in tournaments, you're going to see them there. So, when you're setting up as a Space Marine player across from a non-Space Marine player, they already have an idea of what they're going to do this entire game. Or you may not. You may be your first time playing Dark Eldar. So, in that regard, it's a weakness because the opponent has a leg up on you and that they know kind of how to deal with a Space Marine force and play against one where you may not know how to play against Dark Eldar. And lastly, they're not invulnerable. And some players, especially newer Space Marines, suffer from what I call Superman complex. They think they're indestructible, and that's not the case. So some people get too aggressive, go too far out of cover. You know, it's fine to leave cover as Space Marines, if I could talk properly, because they don't need cover to survive. It just helps them survive against certain weapons. You gotta be mindful of what your opponent has and can shoot at certain squads to see if they should stay in cover or not. And if you just get too aggressive, you can get picked apart. So, that's the strengths and the weaknesses for Space Marines. So now in the future, and in the Dark Angel video I already did, when I say part of the strengths and weaknesses that they're Space Marines, you'll know what I'm saying. Let's talk about the Codex some more. Legion of the Damned are kind of like a special character, but it's a squad. It's a special squad, I guess you could call it. They're pretty cool. Aside from a model standpoint, their models are great looking. Their sergeant type guy can easily make a cool looking chaplain. But aside from that, their special rules and capabilities can definitely be a big asset to you if that fits into your playstyle. And then of course you have special characters. It's kind of a staple of 40k having special characters. The special characters in the Space Marine Army, there's a bunch of Ultramarines because they're the poster child of this codex. But then you have one special character for a bunch of other chapters as well, like the White Scars and the Salamanders, for example. And they give you more of a flavor to your force. If you take the Salamander special character, you get more of a Salamander feel to your force because of his special rules. Same thing if you take a White Scar or an Iron Hand, not Iron Hand, and a Raven Guard. I don't know why I said Iron Hand. Iron Hands do not, unfortunately, they do not have a special character in this codex. But you take a Raven Guard or a Imperial Fist special character, you do have more of a feel for that force. Now, some people do clones. It's counts as. We all know what counts as is, and the big ones that were very popular, and I think are still kind of the popular clones to do, are Pedro Cantor or Vulcan Hestan. I think Vulcan Hestan being the bigger of the two. So there are counts as armies out there with special characters that aren't of that chapter anymore. Like they take the Vulcan Hestan entry and they use it, but they're not playing Salamanders. That's what I'm talking about. Anyways, let's talk about collecting this force. I just want to, and before I do that, I know I didn't talk too much about the Space Marine Codex in depth. That's not the point here. I just wanted to kind of highlight the special characters and the Legion of the Damned. The Space Marine Codex has nice stuff. It's got Vanguard and Stern Guard veterans, Ironclad dreadnoughts, drop pods, Land Raiders, tactical squads. They have a bunch of nice stuff. Terminators. That's all kind of implied that you know, and if not, you can definitely check them out pretty easily. But collecting a Space Marine force, everybody's got to spend money to play the game, and you don't want to spend a lot of money. So the Battle Force is definitely worth checking out to give you kind of a deal, kind of a bargain on stuff. If you're not going to pick up the Battle Force, what I suggest doing when buying certain things is learning how to magnetize. For example, Razorbacks can take a couple different weapon options. So if you learn how to magnetize, a little bit extra money, a little bit extra practice on learning what to do, but it can really, it really pays off a lot, because you can have a Land Raider Redeemer as well as a Crusader if you magnetize the weapon options. You can have a Predator Annihilator or a Predator Destructor, or a mixture of the two, if you magnetize the Predator. So it saves you from having to buy another Land Raider kit, which is pretty expensive if you do the Redeemer Crusader thing. Now, of course, if you need 2 Land Raiders in the army, you have to buy another kit. But if you're just having one in the army and want to try out the different variants, from the Crusader to the Redeemer, you need one, you're better off magnetizing. That way you can do either. So, if you're not going to magnetize, though, what I suggest doing for rhinos, because every Space Marine army is going to need rhinos. Instead of buying the rhino, buy either the Razorback or the Whirlwind. They're the 2 easier kits to make modular. There's also the Predator and the Vindicator, but the rhino to Razorback or rhino to Whirlwind modularness is easier to do. I suggest doing that. It's a bit more money, but I never buy rhinos just to buy rhinos. I buy them for squads, and if I only have X amount of squads that need rhinos, I'm only going to buy X amount of rhinos. But instead of buying rhinos, I suggest picking up a Razorback or a Whirlwind. You make the top hatch removable, and now you can put the Razorback top on there or the Whirlwind top on there, and you got a kit that's doing double duty now. That way, if you go, what, I don't need a transport for this squad, and then you have points left over on top of those points you saved, you may be able to pick a Whirlwind, try it out. You may go, what, I want to try out a Whirlwind. Build a list so you can try out a Whirlwind, drop a transport, or whatever it may be. And you can do it without buying a kit. Now, of course, like I said with the Land Raider, if you need 2 of those things, you must buy 2 kits. But if you have extra points, you may upgrade a Rhino to a Razorback. And instead of thinking, I can't do that because I don't have the kit, you can just go and do it. So a little bit extra money, but it'll pay off in the long run as you start building more and more lists for your Space Marine forces. Lastly, when it comes to playing Space Marines, I'm not even going to talk about my thoughts on playing them, really, because it's a moot point. They're so tactically flexible. I like to play shooting heavy, but you can easily play assaulting heavy if you wanted to. That's how flexible they are. It doesn't matter on what the army can do, because the army can do anything you want. That's how flexible it is. If you want to be close combat, get in there, cut them off, get in close, you can do it. If you want to be hang back, shoot them up, and then assault what's left, finish it off with assault if you have to, you can easily do that as well. If you want to be maneuverable and fast, you can go with bikers. So, you got a full biker army for speed, you got aggressiveness you can play towards, or you can be more of a let them come and shoot them up type of guy, and not so much a gun line, but just more shooting oriented. Any way of playing will work in this codex. It's very flexible for you. What I will talk about when it comes to playing them is force multipliers. Space Marines are a force where force multiplication is very important. Other armies can do it, but Space Marines do it ad nauseum almost. The best example is a Devastator squad. You have to spend points to upgrade to the heavy weapons. That's the whole point of taking a Devastator squad. That's force multiplication, taking those squad upgrades. When you take the heavy bolter, or you take the missile launcher, or the last cannon, whatever it is, you're adding a force multiplier to that squad, making it more effective at infantry, more effective at dealing with vehicles, or a bit of a extra effectiveness at vehicles and infantry at the same time in the case of missile launchers. And that's where it's at really when it comes to really talking about Space Marine play style. Not play style, but playing Space Marines. Butchered that sentence. Let me restart that sentence. That's where it's at when it comes to talking about Space Marine playability a bit. It's force multiplication. Whether you're close combat oriented, or shooting oriented, or biker oriented, squad upgrades is what makes the Space Marine force able to do what it does. It's a small force that can take on the bigger forces, and it can take on vehicles, monsters, creatures, infantry, all at the same time because of its force multiplication. It's not just range force multiplication. Some armies just have it for close combat, some armies just really have it for range. Space Marines have it in mass for both. You can have a tactical squad, for example, take that missile launcher for your heavy weapon, take like a flamer for your special weapon, and then the sergeant can have a power weapon or a power fist or something like that. That way you have shooting potential at long range to deal with vehicles and some infantry, and in this example with the flamer you got short range anti-horde capabilities, and then if you put the power fist in there, you got close combat capability against heavy infantry, against vehicles, and that's a nice mixture right there. You can do stuff like that, or you can specialize. You can have a multi-melta, melt-a-gun, and then a sergeant with a fist if you really worry about taking out vehicles in range or in close combat. So, force multiplication in a nutshell is basically having war gear upgrades. This is the way I define it. War gear upgrades for your squads that makes them more effective at dealing with the enemy threats. It's a balancing act, and that's how I'll end it. It's a balancing act between squad upgrades, force multiplication, and army size. You make your army too big, you're not going to have a lot of options out there in your force to deal with things because you're not taking as many upgrades. Take too many upgrades, your force can be pretty small, and you may be a bit too small for your liking, where every loss you feel more keenly than you would like. So it's a balancing act. You don't have to upgrade every squad to the max, but having upgrades spread out as opposed to all in one squad also is a good idea. And with Space Marines, their strength of being that tactically flexible force comes from the force multiplication. So you're definitely going to want to do it. Everybody does it anyway, whether you're new to building a Space Marine list, or you've been building them for years, you always do squad upgrades. That's force multiplication. You're doing it already, and that is really the strength of the Space Marine force when it comes to playing the force. Regardless of your playstyle, you have force multiplication options to really hone them to your playstyle. That's why you can play them assaulty oriented or shooting oriented, depending upon your style, because of the upgrades they have. That's part of the tactical flexibility, and that's part of their strength that we talked about earlier. And that's really it, fearless gamers. So I hope you've enjoyed this rambling wildcard primer on the Space Marine Codex. And when I talk about Space Marine Codices in the future, I'm just going to talk about how their strength and weakness on top of anything else is that they're Space Marines. You'll know what I'm talking about. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them. We'd love to hear from you guys. And until next time, fearless gamers, take it easy.